Heaven Official's Blessing. Chapter 165. Audio source: wuxia-world-audiobook.com. Saint born under the ominous star. Pei Ming and the others had entered the yard of a residence, probably in search of a well. Xie Lian entered the yard and commented offhandedly, "The houses on this street are all so impressive." Hua Cheng replied, "The kiln is situated in the imperial capital, the heart of the Wuyang kingdom, and this place is close to the kiln, or rather, close to what was the imperial capital 2,000 years ago, so it's also a place of wealth. Since it's mostly prominent figures and government officials who live here, they're naturally impressive." There certainly was a well, only the sight near that well was exceedingly horrifying. There were 7 to 8 people sprawled over the edge of the well as if they were dying of thirst but still perished after having struggled to make it there. Upon a closer inspection, Xie Lian blinked. This, rather than say they're people, they're more like stone statues. They were of course not live humans, but they weren't corpses, and definitely were not skeletons. Each of them were coarsely made, ashen white stone statues. Xie Lian was about to reach out and touch one next to him. Hua Cheng gave him a look. He immediately remembered the two had only just promised each other not to touch anything strange and dangerous, so he forced down the impulse. Now thinking about it, who in the world would sculpt so many terrifying statues? They should be people indeed, but had transformed into this form for some reason. The front doors of this home was wide open, and Xie Lian looked to the inside of the house and saw there were 2 more people lying on the ground, their positions twisted in a tight embrace. Although their faces were blurred and their expressions unclear, but judging by their action one could already sense terror filled their hearts. There was a bundle of something tightly hugged between the two, and on a closer look Xie Lian realized that it must have been a baby. What had happened was more than clear. Xie Lian said, "Those outside were this household's servants, and the ones inside should be the master's family of 3. And Hua Cheng said, "After the volcano erupted, the Wuyang River's flow became running lava. The residents who lived in the high plains weren't burned to death by the lava or blazing fires, but they couldn't escape the blanketing volcanic ash and died from suffocation. The enveloping volcanic ash instantly wrapped their whole bodies and formed a layer of hard shells on the surface, preserving the last moments of those people, transforming them into stone statues. That old well was of course long since dried out. Pei Ming wasn't interested in studying the faces of the dead either, so he left, carrying Pei Su with him, and continued the search for water. Suddenly, Xie Lian noticed something strange, and flipped into the house, crouching down next to the stone bodies of the family of 3. Hua Cheng entered too, and asked, "What did you want to see?" Xie Lian furrowed his brows slightly. "I just think their positions are a bit strange. These 2 adults are holding each other tightly with one arm, but the other arm was tucked in their chests, like they were gripping onto something firmly. You want to see what's in their hands?" Hua Cheng asked. Xie Lian only just nodded when Hua Cheng tapped once on the joint stone statues. Xie Lian exclaimed, "Wait, wouldn't this be too disrespectful to their Ramei?" However, Hua Cheng moved faster than he did, and the family of 3 instantly broke into a pile of shattered ashen white shards. Hua Cheng said quietly, "No need to be too concerned. They've long been dead, and the remains were already no more. In that pile of shards were nothing. Those stone statues were hollow on the inside. Although on the surface the volcanic ash formed a solid protection shell, but the corpse wrapped inside would still rot and break down. After the rotting was done, what's left was only this layer of ashen shell on the surface. All lives must come to an end, leaving behind only that which had never lived in the everlasting." Within the blocks and pieces of those ashen shards on the ground were some not yet fully rotten through pieces of cloth and the accessories on the host's bodies, such as rings, earrings, necklaces, etc. Xie Lian felt what this couple were gripping at the face of death couldn't possibly be those jewelries, and was picking through them when Hua Cheng picked up something and handed it to him. "What's this?" Xie Lian asked. "It's what they were clutching in their hands," Hua Cheng said. It was a pendant, a shimmering golden plate and something akin to bones were hanging off of the chain. Upon the golden plate was engraved patterns, and Xie Lian lightly dusted off the ashes on the surface to look at the details. The ominous star? 1. What was depicted on the golden plate was a celestial drawing. Gold for the heavens, agate for stars. This was what they called the sign of the ominous star, which was the celestial phase of when the star of glowing befuddlement stood still in the heart constellation. The star of glowing befuddlement had historically been seen as the star of war and death, and when it rested within the heart constellation, it was even more ominous a sign, especially towards rulers and emperors and other such leaders. So why was such a celestial drawing engraved on an accessory? No, this shouldn't have been an accessory. Xie Lian fumbled through the shards of the shells again for a while and found the other 2 pendants that looked exactly the same. There were 3 in total. Even the baby in this couple's arms had one. Under what circumstances would the same accessory be kept 3 times? This couldn't be a protection charm, could it? Xie Lian wondered. Only protection charms could give those at the brink of death the urge to grip them tightly, to pray madly with the last vestiges of hope amidst terror. "It is," Hua Cheng said. "I've dug through a part of this city too, and I've discovered this protection charm on quite a number of these statues." Xie Lian hummed. The people of Wu Yang worship their crown prince, so this should be the protection charm of the crown prince. But why draw this celestial phase on the protection charm? Does the crown prince have any connection to the ominous star? Because the day he was born, it was the celestial phase of the ominous star, Hua Cheng said. So, the people of Wu Yang used this celestial phase to symbolize him. How did Senling find this out? Xie Lian asked. Hua Cheng flipped the gold plate over. It's written on it. Sure enough, on the back side was engraved a column of characters. Hua Cheng explained. These words mean, saint born under the ominous star. Maybe now in the present, having the star of glowing befuddlement rest in the heart constellation is a grave omen, but things might be different 2,000 years ago. Xie Lian stroked that line of words, his heart slowly sinking. Since the day he was born, it was also the sign of the ominous star. Was this not too coincidental? He rose to his feet. Let's go to the divine temple. The two walked down the long street side by side. Pei Ming and the others weren't fruitful in their search in the area, so they followed along too. There were many remnants of carriages on the streets, some resting by the roadside, some completely overturned on the ground. There were also a number of scattered stone people lying on the ground, each with bizarre mannerisms, but the majority had gone back to their own homes to escape the disaster, so those were homeless beggars or travelers who couldn't make it home in time. The cries and struggles in that moment before death were all preserved, and the group of them traversed through this bizarre sight. Hua Cheng pointed out for Xie Lian which ones were residences of wealthy merchants, which ones belongs to the entertainment district. Xie Lian couldn't help but ask. Sanliang, the Wu Yang kingdom had fallen for over 2,000 years, and there weren't any descendants left, so how did you learn to read their words? He couldn't have just forcibly learned from nothing. There should have been a door to the method. It's not too difficult, Hua Cheng said. Gerger can see that some Wu Yang characters are very close to the modern characters. It's true, Xie Lian said. The two words, Wu Yang, are indeed very close to the modern characters. Right. So, those two words were the first few of the Wu Yang words I've learned, Hua Cheng explained. There's a few more that are like this, and when mixed in a phrase, the rest of the words can be deduced. There are some that have the same character but different meaning, but not too many. Xie Lian nodded, and Hua Cheng continued. And then, there are words that show up more frequently. Like those two. He pointed at two buildings on the street. It's easy to tell what kind of place this is. On the signs, the words on the top are different but the ones on the bottom are the same. Therefore, what the bottom words mean could be easily determined, either a tavern or a restaurant. There are many ways to do this. If Gerger wants to know more, I'll tell you all about it when there's time. So that was it. There were actually people in this world who could use their own powers to figure everything out without any help. Xie Lian couldn't help but be awed. The Divine Temple of Wuyang was still the grandest and the most impressive building in the city. The group of them arrived before the temple, but before they entered, Pei Ming suddenly spoke up. "What's that noise?" Squeak, 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 squeak. The noise came from afar, and dispersed from afar. Rats? Xie Lian wondered. Not your typical rats. But, if there's rats then that means there's water nearby, Hua Cheng said. When they entered the temple, this time, there were no traces of burning on the walls. They could see by just raising their heads the immense, vibrant colors of the mural. However, this time, there wasn't only one mural, but left, center, right, 3 sets. There was a mural on each of the 3 walls. The group of them came before the first mural and looked up. The Crown Prince of Wuyang was sitting upon the clouds. His body shone with golden light. However, his expression was severe. In his left hand was a ball of light, and within the glow was a small mountain that was spewing flames. In his right hand his 5 fingers were pressed together, his palm facing forward, seeming to be waving. Below was a palace, and in the palace stood over 10 people, each of their attires and accessories lavish and sumptuous, and each of their gestures were different. Some had their arms wide open, some were donning armors and carrying bows, and some were pointing into the far distance with an agitated expression. The details of the painting were complex and abundant. Xie Lian studied it for a good while before turning around. Let me tell what I've gathered from this painting. This ball of light held in the left hand of the Crown Prince of Wuyang contains the scene of a small volcanic eruption, which meant he had told his dream to those down below. As for the gesture of his right hand, it's obviously a rejection, so he must be dismissing something. What is he dismissing? Pei Ming asked. That'll depend on the actions of the people below, Xie Lian replied. This palace is situated in the mortal realm, lavish and glamorous, so it should be the royal palace. These people should be the royalties and nobility of Wuyang. This one with his arms wide open, judging by the action, he should be making the expand gesture. Expand what? That's told by what's in his hand. The crowd looked closer, and what's in his hand was a map. Pei Ming was more than familiar with what that meant. Expand the territory. Yes, Xie Lian said. And these generals are all donned in armors, looking ready to be dispatched and are ready to go into battle. There are also those on the side pointing the way. Look, their directive actions are very obvious. It's like they're saying, go there, fight there. Single quote, quote dot. With this, the meaning of this mural becomes easy to understand. Combing the points, it seems the Crown Prince of Wuyang had told his prophecy dream to the ministers in the royal palace. Once the volcano erupts, the consequences would be severe, and it would be a disaster that could bring ruin to the Wuyang kingdom. The territory of the kingdom isn't big enough because the volcano is situated right in the center, so the cities with great significance will perish. So how should this be solved? If their own territory isn't big enough, then go take over someone else's, Hua Cheng said. Right, Xie Lian said. So, the ministers suggest opening up the borders and invade the neighboring country. However, the Crown Prince of Wuyang doesn't agree to this method, which is why his right hand is the gesture of rejection. After analyzing the first mural, the group of them came to the second mural. The colors of this mural was much gloomier than the previous one. Perhaps it was because what it depicted was the scene of slaughter on the battlefield. Below on the battlefield, blood flowed like the rivers, and the soldiers on both sides killed relentlessly. Xie Lian could tell which side was the soldiers of Wuyang since their armors were exactly the same as the generals from the previous painting. The Wuyang soldiers looked savage and aggressive, trampling the heads of their enemies under their feet. Corpses raised by halberds, arms and legs and bloody flesh flew in the slaughter, bloody and cruel. There were even soldiers who reached for children and women huddled in a ball with savage smiles. Truly, the horrors of war. Above the battlefield, the gloomy clouds were thick, yet within the clouds peeked a sliver of white light. The Crown Prince of Wu Yang peeked half of his body from the clouds to watch the scene down below, his expression that of fury. One of his arms were extended out, releasing many pillars of golden light, and the Wu Yang soldiers in the light were all sucked up. This painting's meaning was easier to analyze than the previous one. Xie Lian studied it for a moment before saying, softly, "It seems the generals and ministers didn't listen to the Crown Prince's advisement and still dispatched armies to invade the neighboring country. The soldiers killed too much, even harassing the women, children, and the weak from the other kingdom, so when the Crown Prince found out, he was angered, and moved to stop the aggression of the Wu Yang soldiers." After Pei Ming heard, he said flatly, "How touching. But to be honest, if one of the kingdoms must perish, then choosing to protect your own couldn't be helped. The soldiers charging in the front lines, if they haven't yet been cut down by their enemies, they would have died from rage with their own crown prince. I certainly wouldn't want to fight for a king like that." Xie Lian chuckled dryly a couple times and said a little woefully, "General Pei is, right." Hua Cheng, on the other hand, only grunted coldly. Pei Ming continued, "So, the volcano's about to erupt. What does His Highness the Crown Prince plan to do? He can't just let his own people wait for their own deaths." "Let's look at the third painting," Xie Lian said. "It should have the answer." The group of them finally came before the last painting. The colors of this mural was an enormous contrast to the previous one. It had returned to bright and vibrant, filled with holy light. However, with the first look, Xie Lian was shocked to the core, and he widened his eyes. Pei Ming took a look. "My God, is this the idea the Crown Prince of Wu Yang came up with? Daring. Worthy of admiration." On the third mural, at the bottom of the painting, was the Wu Yang kingdom. The Wu Yang River flowed wildly across the earth, and the Crown Prince with his 4 guardian gods were also in it. However, they weren't the focal point. Within this painting, the most prominent object, what was at the center, was a bridge. A giant bridge shing with white light was held up by the Crown Prince of Wu Yang and his 4 guardians, and the people on the ground were swarming towards the bridge with smiles covering their faces. This Crown Prince of Wu Yang had built a bridge that connected the heavens with the intention of bringing his people to the heaven realm. Translator's notes. The star of glowing befuddlement resting in the heart constellation, aka the ominous star. In this translation, ancient Chinese astronomers believed Mars was unstable in both position and light, hence they called it the star of glowing befuddlement, and it symbolized ruin, pestilence, death, famine, war, and other such bad omens. The Heart constellation in Chinese astronomy sits in the east by Scorpio, and symbolized the Crown Prince, the Emperor, and depending on where in the constellation, the commoner. Thus, when Mars enters the Heart constellation and moves within it, it was often interpreted as major changes in politics and dynasties, the fall of greatness. End chapter.